My announcement comes without wine, but before we get there, welcome to Keynote 3 on day 2. I am pleased to introduce Jonathan Chemla as our next speaker. Jonathan is the Chief Technology Officer and Head of Innovation of Iconem. Iconem is a young Paris-based startup that focuses on the reconstruction and analysis of endangered archaeological sites, which constitute the world's common heritage. To prevent the loss caused by destruction during conflict, looting, or natural disasters, Jonathan's group sends teams to these sites in order to produce ground surveys, train people, and help communities produce precise and thorough documentations. Through visual processing algorithms, Iconem's mission is to digitize heritage sites across the world in order to produce detailed 3D copies of the sites at one point in time. They offer the scientific community open access to the documentation and the general public the possibility to explore famous places through dedicated tools and exhibitions. Iconem's work works in close collaboration with UNESCO, the World Bank, and Ministries of Culture around the world. Their work on Palmyra particularly has been recently covered by the New York Times, as well as the exhibition at the Grand Palais in Paris titled Eternal Sites from Bamiyan to Palmyra, where the documentation is being displayed in an immersive exhibition that allows an audience to experience sites that are no longer available to the public or for the public to visit. In the last year, Iconem's team has flown drones over 20 historic sites in Syria and have recently moved into a Kurdish-held area, the sites in Iraq, participating in an emerging field of war archaeology. Jonathan holds a double MS in computer vision, graphics, and imaging from Supelec and University College of London. He was the first member to join the founding team of Iconem in 2015 after having worked on self-driving vehicles and medical imaging at CEA as a research engineer. Jonathan's main focus is in the development of novel techniques that produce large-scale 3D scenes and their visualization using real-time 3D engine. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Chemla.
Okay, so thank you, Marina, for the introduction, and thank you for all the ACADIA staff for inviting me to present you our work at Iconem. So I'm a CTO of the company. It's a young startup. We're a bit more than 10 people in Paris, and we're working on various sites across the world to digitize the endangered heritage sites. So first, for a brief introduction, I will first present you the context in which we act, why we do what we do in the company, and how the project was born. And I'll briefly introduce you with the technology we're using, and then jump to concrete examples of how these technologies can help document and archive very large sites in a very, very short time frame. We'll focus on several different concrete examples, and then finally explore how these 3D scenes reproduced can be used as a layer, as a basic layer for all kind of different documentation, and how these can help understand the evolution of a site across time. And at the end of the talk, we'll see how these data reproduced can also be used to promote heritage during exhibitions like the one that happened at the Grand Palais. Okay, so why are we doing what we do at Iconem? There are different causes for the degradation and disappearance of heritage sites, monuments, and structures all over the world. There are natural causes such as floodings or earthquakes, and even erosion, which is a slower cause of degradation of sites. And there are also human causes for this disappearance. Looting is a really impacting one, which leads to the destruction or disappearance of parts of the sites, but also mess up with all different layers of archaeological layers that scientists use to understand our history or the history of the sites. There is also urbanization, like the expansion of cities, which slowly grow over archaeological sites, resource mining, even tourism, which damages some sites today. And finally, more brutal destructions caused by conflicts, or even ideological destructions are happening a lot more in the recent years, where groups destroy culture to tighten the control over the populations by annihilating culture. So having made this observation, the two founders of the company, one architect who worked a lot on sites in the Middle East, and so each of these factors impact the sites. And the drone pilot, they joined together and met with research teams, computer science, from the Computer Science National Research Institute in France, and used find new ways to record these heritage sites. Okay, so the brief introduction to this concept of photogrammetry. These are the basic algorithms that lies behind the 3D reconstructions of sites. So you take a lot of images or photos of a site under different angles, and then you can use automatic techniques to detect features in these images and then match all these features across the set of photographs. And solving a mathematical problem, you can find back the original position and orientation of the camera as it took each picture within the environment, and then in a way project back all the pixels of the images in the 3D space. So you get a 3D point cloud, which is an exact digital copy of the environment that was covered. And then you can use that point cloud. You can mesh it and texture it. And these were the very first. So photogrammetric techniques have been there for quite a lot of time, but it was the first time we could apply them on archaeological fields and on very large scales. So on projects I will introduce right after. How this works on the field, usually there's a team to 2 to 4 people that goes on fields. Here you are in Iraq, in Baghdad and Samarra. Last year, you have the drone pilot. Depending on the country you're in, you can fly different types of drones. The drones fly at different altitudes to cover different scales and resolutions. You do the same from the ground using high resolution DSLRs. Sometimes cameras mounted on poles. And then you get all these photographs using a specific protocol of acquisition, and you process them once you are back from the field, back in the office in Paris. Maybe, yeah, see, here is the pole. We'll maybe also see long-range drones we've been using right after this image. Okay, sometimes under some circumstances, you can also have the need to use long-range drones to cover sites that are not accessible from the ground for safety reasons, and this will also be presented during the talk. It's the site of Khorsabad in Iraq, which was over ISIS-controlled territories. So we had to take off, to make the drone take off from the battlefront in order to do the acquisition. And you will see it take off. Okay. So who are our partners? Who are we doing this work for? I often forget to talk about this, so I have a slide now, so you hopefully won't ask at the end of the talk. We've been working with different Ministries of Culture, with big institutions like UNESCO, even United Nations, the World Bank, and now more and more we're working with museums for exhibitions purposes, sometimes documentary producers. And actually, some of the projects we do are not funded by anyone. We cannot find the fundings, and still we have the need to go on the field and do some missions. It happened a lot, for example, for the Syrian Heritage Project that we'll see. And so some of the projects we do are also funded by ourselves. And that's why we also launching what we call the Iconem Fund, which aims at answering this problem to find fundings, even for missions which don't yet have, are not backed, for example, by UNESCO or by international fundings. So that's quick quick note. So here for the team, we came from a lot of different areas. We have a lot of different backgrounds. We are engineers, photographs, computer graphics designers, coders, and the commercial communication people. What's important is that we come from the broad, large horizons, and some people of the team go on the field, some don't, and that's so all the work you'll see have been produced thanks to all these people here. So it's really important to note. So now that was it for the introduction. What I'm going to present now are so 3 different parts. First, how you can do these 3D surveys over very large scale sites, some large in area, but also large in the number of sites you can cover under a short time frame. Then we'll see how drones help us do very quickly the acquisitions, and sometimes it's important for emergency situations. And finally, how we can layer different states of the sites over the years. So here are the different projects we made. This is the site of Mesa Ainak in Afghanistan. It's 20 kilometers south of Kabul. And the Ainak mountain you can see here is actually a very large buddhic site, and underneath you have the second largest copper mine in the world, which is soon to be exploited. So this site was discovered a lot of years ago, but 5 years ago there was this project of the mining facility that was going to be implanted on site and lead to the destruction of several different structures you have over the site. And we were called, this was the very first application of the technology for the Iconem project, and this leads to this multi-scale and multi-resolution model of the area. These are all computer-generated images of the site. You are navigating through the models, which merges both the natural landscape with the architectural elements, with the sculptures, scale, and statues, and so on. So it's a very complex site. What's important is that most of the sculptures and structures are in terracotta, which is very brittle, so you can't move them very easily. So some of them will eventually disappear after the exploitation of the site. So we've been working with archaeologists to do this 3D archive of the site as it is, and as it was different year after year. We've been going to this site to document every sculptures that were uncovered from the excavations. At the beginning, it was even possible by navigating around the model to find out places where archaeologists thought they could find important structures underneath. So it was very useful for the scientists, and it's going to be useful for promotion of this culture and heritage. And another important project we had around the same time was Pompeii. We were the first to 3D digitize the entire antique city of Pompeii. It was a project led with Microsoft Research and INRIA. And again, it was a very large scale 3D representation of the site. Pompeii is several square kilometers large. And again, we merged these different levels of resolution in the same 3D reference space. So you can extract a various number of documents from this 3D model, like the plan you just saw. Again, it's very detailed, so you can choose the viewpoint after you've acquired the data and you have the 3D model, so it's an important tool to understand the evolution of the site. More recently, these multi-scale sites, you can see here the Greek island of Delos, which is 3 kilometers long by 1 kilometer large, something like that. And we did several flights. One drone flew at 200 meters altitude, another at 30 meters altitude, and then all the different structures were also covered from the ground. And you have the different levels of resolution here shown, like the red box is the theater quarter, which you can see the resolution of the high altitude drone on the upper left, then the low altitude drone on the upper right, the green box. And finally, one villa which was covered from the ground. You can see its level of accuracy here. The resolution is like sub-millimetric. It's half a millimeter resolution for all the different structures. And this is all available in the same reference space, in the same 3D space, in the same 3D model. This was also done more automatically than the first works I've been showing, like Messianic and Pompeii were a bit involved in a bit of manual work. Now for Delos or Hyderabad, which is the first Indian site we've covered here, you do this merging of resolution nearly automatically. You can get this large-scale representation with a high accuracy on the different structural elements automatically. And these large-scale processing techniques means we can also now do these 3D scans on lots of smaller sites, but on more and more smaller sites. And that's why we launched the Syrian Initiative project, which Mariana mentioned. It's the first initiative we launched to scan the most sites of a country's heritage. You can see here different sites. There are more than 20 sites now, and we've been doing this a lot with the Syrian Director General of Antiquities and Museum, which we trained also to do the acquisition and processing. You can see the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, the Jabli Theater, Amrit site, and there are more than 20 sites also on the way. So the Umayyad Mosque was an important one because it was in late 2015. We used that monument to train local teams and archaeologists do the acquisition, and it's a really important tool for them to be able to document their heritage, even without our help. So it's an interesting, with a very bright mosaics mosque. Okay. There is also the first site we made was in Syria was the Crac des Chevaliers. What's important with this one is that actually today we are in the process of processing all the data we collected on the site, and this time it's like 150,000 images that are being processed, which were collected at the beginning of this year, and it merges all the exterior with the interior, every interior room on the same space. And it's important because these structures suffered a lot of damage during the Syrian conflict. There are bullet holes visible, demolition due to explosives, and so on, which are highlighted by the 3D model. And now we're working in more than 20 countries and counting. So the takeaway number one is you can use this multi-scale representation of different archaeological sites for archiving purposes. So scientists can exploit these models, which have a high accuracy, which can be produced for large sites, and you can systematically document the heritage for several countries. So now for the second part of the talk, speeding up fieldwork. This can be very helpful. Drones actually can be very helpful to help acquire all these images very quickly, and that's an important thing for different reasons. For example, to evaluate remotely looting or the damages suffered by sites. It's important to take all the data we can very, very quickly, and that's what we are going to show for Khorsabad and Nimrud. These are two emblematic sites, two capitals of the Mesopotamian Empire, which were over ISIS-controlled territories. At the time, we were planning to scan them, and we used long-range drones to access them and do these 3D scans remotely. So this is the 3D model of the city of Khorsabad. You can overlay on top of it the plan of the excavations in the 1830s when the site was accessible. And what's important with this superimposition is that from the 3D model, you can have a lot of different informations. If you manipulate the 3D model, you can see, for example, stones that are not visible from satellite imagery, for example, architectural elements in the bottom right. You can also see some tunnel entrances. So it seems like there are a lot of tunnel entrances appearing at different parts in this 3D model. And when you overlay that with the plan of the city, you can see that those tunnel entrances in black, shown in black, focus on some parts of the citadel which were not excavated before. So there were still probably some important objects left there, and they have probably been looted right now. And it's important to do this in order to know what kind of objects you can look for on the black market, for example. We did the same kind of thing for Nimrud. Again in Iraq, in June 2016, we had this remote 3D model of the ancient capital of the site. You have the ziggurat in the upper right, the important palace in the middle, the Nabu temple in the lower left. Another view from the city. From this plan, by comparing it with different layers, different older satellite imageries, you can say, okay, so these are two images very close in time, beginning of June and end of June from UNESCO and from Iconem, and you can see the evolution of the site, which parts of in this time the Nabu temple were destroyed, the explosion were shown in a lot of propaganda videos from ISIS. And for the Northwest Palace, for example, here on the left, you have more than half of the monument which were destroyed. It's also interesting to note that most of the videos that were shot and shown in the propaganda videos were not taken from some of the rooms which were exploded. So probably these rooms have been looted before, and they did not want it to show they had been. So it's also an important thing to understand the looting and degradation of the sites. This is the ziggurat in the northwest. We could go back to the site after the ISIS troops left, and this is again the state of the ziggurat after it was built. So you can really use that information to understand how the site evolved and how destruction happens. This example is a bit more concrete. It's Aleppo. We've been there again several times since the city was accessible. It's important to do these emergency actions to help plan the possible restoration you can do on the site. So, for example, for the citadel of Aleppo, you can draw a very precise map of the very precise plan from the 3D data, and then you can see where there are parts and portions of the building that were destroyed or suffer a certain amount of damage. And then you can, say these regions need the more work in order for the restoration to happen. And this is all done because we can quickly get the data, quickly process it, and produce the 3D model. The souk of Aleppo is also an important one. So portions of the souk were also covered earlier this year. And the damage evaluation here is useful for guiding the restoration. So this is the 3D render inside the souk. What's important here is that these places are really dark, and you can't get a lot of info by just getting there. So you need to use specific lighting conditions and equipment to produce a good 3D model that can then be used to see the different portions of the architecture that are missing, and then you can give all these documents to the heritage architects, which will say, okay, this is how the site is, these and these regions need more work, need the restoration to happen more in priority. The Palmyra Museum is again important part of emergency action, but I will be very brief about it. We had the chance to go on the Palmyra site in April 2016, right after the ISIS troops left the site for the first time. Then they got back on site, but we could do the 3D scan of the entire site of Palmyra and also the entire museum. These are some images, and this is a 3D render of the the monument. First, it could be useful to secure the artworks and sculptures, and also to make an inventory of what structures were in the museum. And it was also important for restoration of the different sculptures and for freezing that moment in time, that moment in history, so that we can then access it and try to understand how the site was completely destroyed, systematically destroyed by ISIS troops. Again. So takeaway number 2, you can do all this acquisition very quickly thanks to the use of drones. Sometimes it's even important because you can fly over zones which are still not cleared of mines, for example, like in Palmyra, which we'll see again after. And this is, for example, in comparison to laser scanners, which sometimes we need to use, is important to being able to do that very quickly for emergency situations. Now we'll see how the 3D model that we produce, so that's the more interesting thing, how the 3D model that can be used as basis for all kinds of different documentation, all kinds of archives or other 3D models that are available for a site. And it's a powerful tool to study sites and artworks across time. It's important to important the evolution of the state of a monument. It's important to also being able to restitute previous states of a monument, like we'll see for the Temple of Bel. And finally, training local professionals help us gather as much data, more and more data, and have more and more models of an architecture over time. So here is a quick example of the Temple of Bel. When ISIS took the city, we could not access the site, so we decided to try to gather as much data as we could and produce this 3D model of the state of the Temple of Bel in the 1930s, thanks to stone-by-stone drawings by architect Robert Ramy and old photographs, which were mapped onto the site, which you could find a lot of different tourist pictures, which produced this 3D model of the Temple of Bel here. And what's important is that for us right now, it's the only 3D model of the temple that's available for the pre-destruction state of this structure. Right now, in April 2016, when we could get access to the site, all what's left was these different monuments. You can see here the Bel Temple, which was exploded, the Monumental Are, which was bulldozed, Bel Temple, and Valley of Tombs. A lot of different sites suffered a great extent of damage and destruction. Still, it was very useful to do this 3D reconstruction on site, to being able to assess the damages suffered by the different stones, for example, of the Temple of Bel, you can see on the right. Stronger color means blocks are more whole, they're not broken into different pieces and parts like the lighter blocks, which could not be reused for potential restoration. The superimposition of the different states of the Temple of Bel, you can see in the lower left or here in the video, will help us eventually plan a restoration. That's not something we are looking into on the Bel Temple, but for the Palmyra Arc, we'll see that in a second. So that's here how the site was before it was exploded and how it is today, all the states superimposed. For the Palmyra Arc, we had access to the same kind of documentation, but this time we could draw a stone-by-stone model of the arc, which was useful to do a simulation of the destruction of it. This, actually, the Monumental Arc was not exploded. There were not explosives used, but it was bulldozed, and it's what the simulation led us to think. And this time it will be useful to plan the restoration, to find back the original position of the different blocks in the architecture, find their state of conservation, is it possible to use them for an eventual restoration. So we are not stating, okay, this is what we should do or not. We're just giving all this documentation to the heritage specialists who can then state over the feasibility of a restoration project. And this, again, is a simulation, but running backwards of the degradation of the arc, running backwards. Finally, being able now to layers different state of a site at different points in time, we can now understand the evolution of the site over time and understand how sites and artworks change or dramatically or not over time. What's also very important for us is that having this ability, we also can merge more and more documentation in the same 3D space, and for that we can train local archaeologists, local professionals, like we've done in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and this is very important to give them back, to give them the tools to do the acquisition and processing in order for them to being able to do all this documentation by themselves, sometimes focus on portions that were that have changed a lot, and being able to merge that in the 3D, in this collaborative 3D model. The evolution of the monument has a lot more steps now that they have the tools to do the 3D documentation themselves. So that's the takeaway number 3. Then we'll move to the new perspective for scenography. Okay, so these, all what I've shown, all what you've seen right before, were possible uses of 3D documentation and how this can be used by scientists. Actually, what we've been seeing a lot is that all this data can also be used for promotion of cultural heritage. It can be used for exhibition purposes, for documentary production. It can be used for letting the people visit the sites that are not accessible, that have changed a lot across the recent years. And this is something we've experienced, for example, with the Eternal Sites exhibition that happened at the Grand Palais at the beginning of this year. So this exhibition was the very first time we used those 3D models of 4 different sites to immerse the visitor into 4 sites of the Middle East. So Khorsabad we've seen, Palmyra, the Crac des Chevaliers, and the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. And so this scene, the exhibition was set up as a very long room where projections were shown over the walls. Projection of these different 4 sites were shown over the walls to really immerse the visitor like if he was sometimes on these sites. You can see here the setup of the room, showing the different 3D renders and different immersion we could use at that time. What was also interesting is that we could use augmented reality and virtual reality to really make people feel like they were in this site. So you put the headset on and you are transported to Palmyra, which just was liberated 4 days ago. You can be transported to sites all over the world while still being where you are. And what's important is also you can have get a sense of how the site evolved through time. This is still this exhibition was also putting an emphasis on the way the archive was important to the understanding of the site over the world. So you also had this response of the real site with the different archives that were acquired at different points in time. So now virtual reality, augmented reality, these new techniques, these new kind of exhibitions really help transmit, promote culture, and let people understand that culture is a really complex thing, that culture is not linear at all. It's a mix of culture from people today, is a mix of different cultures of the past. And it's really important to put the emphasis on this to let people understand that. So as a final note, we are now seeing like a new kind of tourism. Instead of bringing the tourist to the site, we can bring these remote sites to the visitor and let them access this common past and their shared culture and origins. And this can help people, can motivate people to participate in the heritage preservation and the cultural heritage preservation. After having seen this exhibition, a lot of people were trying to, they were reaching out saying, what can I do to help you? How can I possibly do something that would be of interest for the documentation of the sites or for doing your work? And actually, it involves a lot more the public with this idea of preservation of heritage. And this participation has also paved the way for an idea that everyone can really contribute by giving access to the tourist pictures they've taken of a monument that's now destroyed. And for this, we can try to put everything in the same. We are trying to build a collaborative platform that will help people do this participation in the preservation, but also access the resulting 3D data that was produced for all these sites across the world. So that's the last slide of the presentation. Important takeaway is really the work we've been doing this because we are really motivated by it, because it resonates a lot for every person in the team. So like what I can say is, if you have a cause that really resonates for you and you get a passionate team, you can combine all your experiences and skills, and you will always succeed in designing and getting the solution to that particular problem, to the cause that you are trying to fight. So that's the last slide of the thing, and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them right now. Okay.
We have mics to pass around the audience, so if somebody has a question, just raise hands and we'll bring them over.
Thanks for the interesting presentation.
Yeah.
How do you reference all your data? You have so many images to combine in one coordinate system. How do you do that, roughly?
Roughly, it's mostly what the photogrammetric algorithms are here for. You don't necessarily need to have prior information on where that photograph was taken. You get to know by combining all these photographs the relative position of each photo with respect to the others. So, for example, for the Crac des Chevaliers, we had 100,000 pictures. They were all combined automatically in the same 3D space after a lot of works on very powerful computers. But now we have all this data, and we also have reference points. So we know, this point, these, for example, 4 points on the Crac des Chevaliers have these specific coordinates. So having that relative positioning and these absolute coordinates, you can get the original position of each picture on each point in space, each point of the model. That's it.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. What information are you missing? Is there a technology that you wish you had or that you wish existed that would allow you to capture other information that you don't have?
We are, yes, that's an important thing to state. We are only showing what we are able to capture with the photographs. So we are only transcribing the geometry and texture of the site we've covered, and nothing more. We cannot go under the earth, for example, which we can do with other techniques. Some works are trying to exploit both these 3D photogrammetric or laser scanner models with ground penetrating radar to get a sense of what structures are under the earth. What's interesting though is that sometimes you get to see what usually you cannot see on photographs. For example, there was a site in Iran later at the end of last year. So the team on the ground was really freezing. It was a very cold day, and they made a 3D scan with the drone. It's the site of Pasargad, so it's not. You can see a lot of structures. There are some portions of monuments visible, but not a lot. And then actually, after they did that scan, snow was coming, so they had to stop the acquisition. And then they got to do some tourism in Iran. And then the archaeologists called them and say, okay, you need to go right now because the snow is beginning to melt. And actually, because some structures absorb more the water than the others, you can actually really, from the top, you would see a beautiful view of the different walls drawn in the snow because they absorb the water more. So that sometimes you can combine different techniques to see under the earth, and that's a very useful tool. Doing this with, for example, infrared imagery will also be possible. It's still hard to do, but it's an important tool to understand what's not visible on the photographs. Okay.
I found the idea with engaging the local archaeologists very interesting, but how sustainable is it in the long term?
That's a good thing to point out as well. So we've done, like last year, we only did this in Syria, and actually the people who were working with, we've seen them a lot on different countries. So for the Syrian archaeologists, we know 2 to 3 people who really knows the technique and can do the acquisition even without our help team. And some other contexts, for example, in Afghanistan, we've only done this once, and actually the team was once the training was done. After that, so there was mostly one person which really understood how to do the whole process from the acquisition to the processing, and a lot of persons from the team then went away or left the archaeological team here in Kabul, and so sometimes it's not useful. It's not. You can't, if you don't do it a lot of time, repeat that process, then you might lose the interest in doing this. And also another important thing to note is that when you train local people to do the acquisition and processing, that's not the only thing you need to do. You also need to train them how to use the data, and it's actually a difficult problem, especially where you don't have access to sustainable electricity, you have a lot of shortage, bad internet connection, and so on. And you also need to train them how to use the data once it was produced, how to open a mesh which might be very large, you also need to give them the right computers and power things to use that information once it was done. Yeah. Thank you.
A question about actually inverting the relationship by bringing the monument to the people. So it's very impressive work. I'm just questioning maybe the over-dominance of geometry as a form of recording any form of history. That's a similar thing in design, etc. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on opening up other layers of recording, let's say also maybe allowing people to record localized stories within the geometry, let's say, because the drone is a very top-down thing in the moment, right, and it just makes absolutely sense for the emergency, etc. But if once it becomes the definitive record, it also becomes probably harder to change it, right, or just to disagree with it, how to not make it a monument of basically, monopoly almost of information.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So yes, you're right. We are only recording how the site looks like right now at the time of the scan. But what's also very important in the transmission of culture is the intangible heritage or the non-physical heritage. There have been some works to try to how do you record a non-physical heritage? You go on the field, you go on different places, and you interview people. You ask them to tell you what are the important parts of their culture, what are the different songs or dances that they do, what are the history of their ancestors and the histories that were transmitted to them. This is something that's hard to integrate to the geometry, but you can try to instead make a more narrative. You can try to narrate the history of the site through different points of interest within the 3D model. So you can say, okay, this is the 3D model. If you just give it to the public, then you don't know where to look. There's too much information. And then you try to bring very like a sequential history of the site by going from point A to point B to point C and so on. And at each of these different points, you can try to translate, to transcribe these intangible heritage information. And that's this is an interesting thing to work on. Yeah. That's.
Is there another question?
Perhaps just one more then.
Okay.
It seems like it's there. Hey, I guess it's interesting for you, especially when you're looking at destruction. So it's very clear why you would want to go and record it. And to pretend, I know you were very clearly said you weren't going to get involved on whether or not it should be restored. But I wonder if, in your opinion, they're ever going to be invited back after they do restoration. And whether or not you can see why you would be, or whether or not you would consider going back to then be able to give a kind of real timeline from something that was there to not there to maybe repaired and there again.
That's a tricky question. We are only giving trying to relate the history of the monument across time. And what I think is that I'm not even sure restoration is possible yet for different in the case of the Palmyra Arch. So some people of the team think it might be possible, but for this, in order to know this, we need to go on the field and we need to compare that information we see on the 3D model with real information and with real specialists, architects, heritage specialists, which know, okay, these structures can be reused for an eventual restoration, these cannot. So imagine once you go on the field, you say you realize you would need to. You could reuse 1/3 of these stones that were blown away, and you would have to rebuild 70% from scratch. Then would that be meaningful to try to replicate the monument as it was before? I'm not sure of that. So that's these questions don't have an answer yet. And once we will have that information, we could eventually imagine the feasibility of a restoration. And then also, is it really important to reproduce the state of the monumental arc as it was before the destructions? I'm not sure of that as well, because the arc as it is today is also the result of the history of the site. It was destroyed because for ideological reasons, and now it's like this. We are not compelled to restore it in the state that it was before. It's also very interesting in the Palmyra case, for example, the Temple of Bel, before being a temple. So right now, it's a pile of stones. Right before, like 2 years ago, it was the Temple of Bel, as we saw on different pictures. But in the 1930s, it was a mosque that was inside a Arabic village in Palmyra. And actually, when the French archaeologists decided to do the restoration, they say, okay, we are going to just wipe that out and restore the monument as it was 2,000 years ago, not in the beginning of the 20th century, but at the beginning of the 0th century. And actually, was this a good thing to do? I'm not sure. Now we have the possibility to transcribe all these different states, so we are more. It's easier for us to choose not to restore these states physically, but to give access to these states during exhibitions or virtually. So that's an open question. That's my point of view on that question.
Skylar, can I do one more?
Go for it.
So your presentation was very impressive, and the project was very impressive visually, technologically, and also it was very impressive because you go to those sites where very little government left and probably very dangerous, and you do all this work. So my question is, do you also work on sites in safe places? You come from France. Do you
Yes.
work on heritage in Paris, for instance?
Yeah.
And in that case, what's the difference in your process or the way you engage with the society, local people, or the purpose? Will you talk about it? And for instance, I fly drone myself and then do some recording of buildings. And I was going to do some work in Vienna. And then I talked to officials in Vienna, and they said, I need at least 6 months in advance to let them know that I'm coming before doing any drone work.
Yes, that's a good point as well. The first, historically, the Iconem project was focused on sites in the Middle East because that's where the two founders were working before working on that project, and that's where the disappearance was the more immediate. That's also where we had the first contacts, so people were trusting us to try the technology on sites like Messainak with the French archaeologists and Afghanistan archaeologists working there. So that's how it worked. We first started where we had the contacts, then the work expanded, but because some people were saying, okay, I've worked with them, their work really helps us in a way, so you should try that. And these were always sites in the same regions. Right now, another one of the first projects we did was in Beaucaire in France. It was a castle which also had a lot of different not severe, very medium damages on the architecture. We've worked in Paris on the Saint-Jacques Tower, on different parts of the Parisian architecture. We've worked in Greece, Italy, Albania. So in this context, actually, you're right, the regulations are heavier so when you want to fly in France, usually you need to take more time to get the authorizations and everything. Actually, in these other countries, the regulations are getting in place as well. So it's becoming harder and harder to allow the drones flying. But since we are working with archaeologists and local people, they often take care of the authorization works as well as the safety, they ensure the safety and security of the teams on the ground is assured. And so we often let them do all these administrative works for the drone flying and for the safety of the team on the ground. But yeah, we also work in Europe, Asia, and yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jonathan, for the impressive presentation.